Alright, hello there. We shall make another video today. Now, today's video will be on deficits. Now, for those who are unaware of how government deficits work, and yes, this is government deficits, not individual deficits, a government deficit is fairly simple. When what comes in is less than what goes out, you have a deficit. Deficits are what create debt. So when people say, oh, they cut the deficit, they're not saying they got rid of any debt. They're not paying off debt. They're just reducing the speed at which debt goes up. It's like someone saying they reduced inflation. The price is still going up, it's just less. So money's still losing value, it's just holding on to a bit more of it as it slowly fades into worthlessness. Now, there are two schools of thought when it comes to it. One is that deficits are fine at all times. This is usually held by people who believe in modern monetary theory. MMT for short, just to make it simple. Others think that deficits need to be controlled. And when I say need to be controlled, I mean they shouldn't be a permanent fixture of government administration. Now, the traditional school of thought is this. Modern monetary theory as well. Modern. Now, I'll go into this because I'll be frank. Modern monetary theory is a load of garbage in this case for a number of reasons. Number one, the more debt you have, the less trust you have. When debt increases, consumer trust decreases. Now, one might ask, well, why? And it's because people are looking at this like, our government doesn't know how to manage our own money. It especially gets bad when taxes are high because people are looking at all that money in taxes and going, well, why are you going to tax us that much if you're not even going to spend within it? At that point, they feel like you might as well just cut the taxes and just do what you're traditionally doing. The other problem is, assuming you're not taking out debt, because there are two ways to deal with a deficit for a government. You either have loans, that's one way, which is where you get debt from. Deficits create the debt by taking out loans. So an IOU is given to, say, a foreign government, private individual, whatever, and they assume a certain amount of government debt as an IOU, which the government's expected to pay back eventually. Does it? Well, considering the last time we were out of debt was Andrew Jackson, and we only got into debt, right after. Yeah, no. You're not getting that money back. But back to the point, when there's a deficit, one option is loans to deal with the deficit. Also, forgive my spelling, it's not the best. So that's one option. The other option is printing money. Now, both of these have the same problem. Inflation. If you print money, well, obviously there's more money in the supply, the supply goes up, price goes down, inflation occurs. Fairly simple, especially because when you just print money, it's not like new goods are coming into the market, like, for example, wood, stone, even services. It's not like that's coming. Rather, what's going on is one good, money, is going up, everything else is staying the same, and so all their prices rise to match it because that's what's used as the intermediary, is that money whose supply is increasing. Loans also have this problem, but for a different reason. See, when you take out a loan, what you're doing is essentially giving someone money you're taking money from someone to spend it. What that means is spending overall goes up, so more money in the market. Same principle. In both cases, inflation is the main issue. Here's your main problem. Now, modern monetary theory acknowledges this and says inflation's what needs to be controlled. Here's the issue. You cannot have a deficit frame of reference when inflation is what you're using to control it, because deficits beget inflation inherently. So, for example, let's say you spend $1 trillion. Let's just say that's 1,000 billion for the sake of ease. And you're not taxing anything, so that's just your deficit. Now, let's say the interest rate, we're being generous here, is 1%. Okay? That's 10 billion every single year, assuming you're not paying it off. So assuming you don't get a surplus and aren't paying it off, that's an extra 10 billion added to the economy every year. And that's just from the deficit alone. Think about what happens as this increases, because remember, this increases like this. Because as the interest compounds, so it goes up by 10 billion here, it'll go up by, let's say, 11 here, probably like 10.1, and so on. As it gets closer, it starts more rapidly increasing. The 1% interest rate is generous, but it's unlikely to stay that way for long because you're not paying back your debts. You become less reliable, and so interest rates increase, and this cycle goes even quicker. No matter what, when you have a giant deficit, it's a problem. Now, in the US, both parties are contributing to this, Democrats and Republicans. Democrats by increasing social spending with their proposals, Republicans by cutting taxes. They say, oh, the other one's the bigger problem, oh, this or that. Here's the thing. They both suck in this regard. It's both their faults. One might say, oh, well, the Republicans increase it more. Yeah, well, at least their tax cuts increase economic growth, allowing for more GDP, which can be used later to pay it off. Not saying the Republicans are innocent here. They freaking aren't. But you can't exactly say, oh, you're somehow worse when your spending only makes things worse for other reasons. Like, oh, I don't know, a system that increases healthcare costs should giving blank checks to the greediest people in the world. Corporate people. Yeah, well, them and politicians. Either way. Not good. The problem on monetary theory, back to my point, is it treats debt like it's just something. Now, debt is not inherently bad. Neither are deficits, depending on the situation. Sometimes when you're in a rut, you need to go in the red a bit to get out of it. For example, let's say there's a recession. For some reason, there's an overproduction of cars. Factories realize, oh freak, we can't afford to keep doing this, so they start producing less cars. Well, that results in an increase in prices, so less cars are bought. Boom, 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 and eventually there's a whole recession going on because the car people now have to start dealing with the results of overproduction. Okay, now that that's occurred, what's the quickest way to get out of it? Tax cuts and going into a small deficit. As such, it honestly is good to save up taxes as a sort of reserve that you can cut later. So if you build let's say around 1 trillion in reserves, then you can safely go into debt for a while through tax cuts without worrying. But back to my main point, deficits sometimes are a necessary thing, and they can indeed help. They're not inherently bad. The problem is, when you treat it like they're just fine, which they aren't, fight me on this, you end up with a situation where things spiral out of control. Because one might say, well, in the games I play it works, or by the theory it works, but it really doesn't for the simple fact of trust. There's a reason conservatives especially are saying we should go back to gold. It's because inflation caused by these modern monetary policies built on this theory is resulting in people having less and less money. If deflation occurred, this wouldn't be happening. In fact, it's actually better for consumer trust to have deflation because people think if I put my money in the bank, who, by the way, is going to use that for loans to help build up markets and the economy, if I put this in the bank, then I'll make more money and I won't have to worry about it. Those savings can then be withdrawn when they think, okay, maybe I can start my own business or buy a house or do this or that. So deflation actually helps with consumer trust. And having a balanced budget or reserves does the same. Think of it like the opposite of debt. If you go into negative debt, consumer trust goes up because as debt goes down, people are like, okay, our people in charge are actually competent. Because remember, the dollar has no inherent value. So that little number in the corner means nothing. Now, it's still useful as a means of exchange. That will always be the case. So long as there's something needed to go between goods to buy stuff. So, for example, so long as the fisherman and the farmer need to trade and can't have everything in season at the same time, something like this is necessary. Just how currency works. But the thing is, the less and less valuable the dollar becomes, the less and less people are willing to use it. And that's true for other currencies as well. The pound, the euro, yen, yuan, dong, whatever you want to call your currency. It's true for all of them. The less valuable your currency is, the less willing people are to use it. It's why, for example, other countries are starting to switch to using their own currencies mainly instead of the dollar as a reserve. Because why would you use the dollar as a reserve when it went through a massive period of inflation and is now less valuable? Sure, it's a good intermediary, and I would argue the dollar should still be held up as a good reserve currency, but, importantly, the less valuable the dollar becomes, the less useful it is as that reserve currency, as that hedge so that people can trade. If the ruble, by some miracle, becomes more stable than the dollar, people are going to want to use that, and suddenly the power of printing money to control things won't work. Because guess who's not going to care about the dollar? Consumers. We see this in Venezuela, for example. Practically the pinnacle of modern monetary theory because they just printed money. Instead of going into debt, they printed money. What happened? People don't use the currency anymore. Why? Because it's not valuable. And you might say, well, small amounts of inflation is fine. Slow burn will be alright. Except it won't, because guess what? This happens with this too. So inflation grows exponentially as well. 2% inflation one year compounds with 2% the next year, and 2% the next, and 2% the next. Eventually, your dollar is going to be worth nothing, basically. Slow inflation does not solve the problem. It merely makes it less noticeable over time, allowing consumer trust to go down more gradually. That doesn't solve the issue at hand of the fact that consumer trust is going down and people are less likely to use your currency, because plain and simply, it's still causing the issues that are creating the situation. Now, in some games, modern monetary theory does sort of work. Does that mean they're correct to real life? No. For example, take Victoria 3. It is a game released by Paradox Interactive. For those who've played it, congratulations. But it has this situation where debt is actually a good thing to be in most of the game because it helps your economy snowball. It makes it a lot easier to build factories and establish industries and thus grow your economy. Here's the thing. Consumer trust isn't modeled in Victoria 3. People just spend money because it's very materialistic in its nature. So instead of saving, they don't keep track of individual expenditures or not. They just group them all together and just say they have this much money and they spend it all when they get it. Which means inherently it's not realistic already because of that. They're purely materialistic in that way. So they get it, they spend it, they practically live a paycheck to paycheck life. And what that means is it's not a good way to model actual humans because consumer trust is never factored in. It can't be factored in. Because fundamentally, when you're just doing the ins and outs with finances and don't allow savings, well, consumer trust doesn't matter because it's just going in and out again and again and again. So it can't effectively model real life. Well, what about other games? Generally, traditional monetary theory holds true in them. Now, some of that's just because they're older games or set in older times, but it works back there. And this doesn't work either because no one wants to take your loans because, well, not only do you not control your currency, no one likes dealing with people who are in debt and can't pay off their debts. Do you see the issue? Trust is something that is very important to an economy. It's very important to life as a whole. Deficits are the antithesis of trust. Because when I pay my taxes, or my family pays their taxes more accurately, when they pay their taxes, they expect that that money is going to things that they care about. They call it extortion regardless, but they expect it to at least go to stuff that is important. To roads, to schools, to the military to defend themselves, and to the police. When they see that, let's say, a third of their income, likely more, is taken from them, and then they are still dealing with a deficit and their government wasting money, all they can think is, why do I give any money in the first place? And a lot of people have that same thought too. What is the point in giving money to a government who can't even spend it right? Who treats it like a, how do I even put this? Like a person who just received a loan and decided to go to the mall. It is insane. People need to trust the government in order to trust its currency. If it can't manage its finances well, they won't trust the currency by extension. And so they won't use the currency, and so all that power that comes from the fact that you're the one controlling the money printer goes away. Ceases. And it compounds every single year you don't fix your budget. So it's honestly better to treat government deficits in the same way you treat a household deficit. It can be fine in a certain situation, in which case it's good to have a reserve for those situations, so you don't have to deal with them like an emergency. But you should still manage things effectively. It's best not to just treat it like you're someone living off their parents' dollar and can just spend. That's stupid. Flatly. It's also foolish. And yet, people say, oh, well, this or that. No, that's just not how it works. You cannot have a situation where people are paying money for something and expecting it to go out well when the price of that thing keeps rising and the returns on that thing keep going down. What is the point of paying taxes if the debt keeps rising and our dollar keeps shrinking? We need every dollar we can in that situation because every dollar we do keep is worth less and less. At what point do you think individuals are just going to say enough? At what point do you honestly think that? Because it's dang sure not never. And by the time they say it, guess what? Your government's done for. So maybe, just maybe, solve it before you get there. Very simple. Anyways, I think that about covers it. Anyways, I'm going to go play Victoria 3 as the United States now, so have a good day.